What's going on, everyone? My name is Rosendo. Welcome back to my channel, and we are back with another video. And today we are back with our track review series. I feel like it's been a while time-wise. I know you guys got a track review I think 2 weeks ago, and the last week you got a remix of a track review I did. That was pretty fun. But now we are back with episode number 13 of our track review series. This time taking a look at Colder by Blanke and Megan Ashworth, an artist that I'm actually pretty excited to review. I don't listen to a lot of Blanke, but I listen to enough of Blanke to know that I like Blanke's music, and I really want to check out more of his stuff. I know he also has a Eon mode, depending on how you pronounce it, and I'm really excited for this one because it'll be a little bit interesting to see how we break down this track, how we break down a track by an artist we haven't viewed at. You know, the last track review, we looked at an artist we already viewed, but there's still so many artists that we haven't broken down that I really want to get into. Blanke is up for today. Who knows what will come up in the future, but let's talk about Colder by Blanke today in episode number 13. Why don't we get to it? Make sure to like and subscribe, but without further ado, let's hop into Spotify. All right, we are back in Spotify taking a look at Colder by Blanke and Megan Ashworth. We have the Blanke jersey for today, the last jersey out of my collection. I should really get more, but I only have a few jerseys, and at this point, I think I've used all of them in the videos, you know, Nurko, Midas, 7 Lines, and Blanke. So jersey for today, taking a look at Colder by Blanke and Megan Ashworth. All right, so what is on our preface for today? 2 things I wanted to mention, 2.5 kind of. Number 1, the first thing you'll notice is that this looks like it's labeled as a single part of a 2-track single. We already talked about this in the Jai Wolf breakdown. We talked about this in probably, I think, the last Heroes breakdown as well, about how I'm going to review this as a single, even if it's a part of a larger work, not only because A, that's how I'm going to do it, but B, that's how it was presented to me. So that's what we're going to do today. If you want more information, go check out those videos. And the only other thing I want to talk about in the preface is just a little bit about what we're going to be rating this track on today, because it's a little bit tough. I've listened to this track 3 times already. It's going to be my 4th time listening to it, actually. And if you saw the 7 Lines Hurricane video, episode number 10 or 11, I think, in that video, I mentioned how, you know, I always find it easy to rate tracks when I can analyze them based on fixed criteria. The 7 Lines Hurricane track was one that was actually a little bit hard to analyze based off fixed criteria, and this one as well. This is going to end up being another one of those subjective videos where I talk about, you know, what I like about the track, what I don't like about the track, and kind of how I take it in and how I rate it, because every once in a while there are tracks that are just kind of are hard to really kind of put together and to understand beginning to end and as a whole. And, you know, all the things I talk about, you know, sometimes the progression and the melodies and the narratives and the storytelling, all those things, they're clear when you listen and experience them, but they're really, really hard to put into words. Sometimes they're really easy to put into words. If you take a look at the Midas Wilderness video, that was a really, really easy one to put all those things into words. Hurricane was a little bit hard one. Nurko, The Longest Night, actually was a little bit of a hard one. This is another hard one as well. So that's just something I wanted to mention. It's going to be, these things are always subjective, but again, I try to be as objective as possible, but it's going to be a little bit hard to put into words exactly what I'm listening to and why I like and dislike certain things, which is the only thing I wanted to say, which brings us to like the half thing. I said 2.5, which is when we're actually listening to it, what are we going to be listening for? The main thing I'm going to point out is I'm just going to point out kind of the things that I like and the things that I don't like, because when I can't quite put into words how I experience and process everything, if I can just point out these things that, you know, I listen and that I think that I'm positive or negative or neutral towards, it might be a little bit easier for you guys to understand where my rating comes from. And that's really my only goal at the end. Not only, but that's really one of my goals at the end of the day, is have you guys understand how I process these things, how we can look at music as something greater, how we can look at it as art, how we can look at how all the pieces kind of work together to tell a story, to tell an experience, and to make something greater than just music. So if I can point out the things that I like and dislike that help you guys understand more of where I'm coming from, to hopefully understand my rating more, that's really all I'm going to be able to do today with this track. So why don't we actually get to it? So why don't we get to actually listening to the track? As a reminder, there will be no audio playing for copyright reasons, but we can all listen to the track at the same time. With Colder by Blanke in 3, 2, 1. You go straight into the track. I'm not a fan of this melody of the lyrics right here. It seems a little bit kind of basic and amateurish. I do like the atmosphere. Good switch up there. Here, I am neutral towards this melody. You know, when I'm in the mood, I like it. When I'm a little bit more analytical, I'm neutral. I'm a little bit negative towards it. So I'm pretty neutral to this kind of area of the track. The more I listen to this track, the more I like this melody here of the vocals, right? The other thing is when there's a lot of elements and things are processed nicely, again, the attention isn't so much on the lyrics, which to me, the lyrics are 50-50. I do really like the processing of these vocals. I'll probably mention that a little bit more in the second verse. Into the drop. What feels like 90 BPM. I do like the drop. It's a little bit basic for future bass, melodic bass, but something about it I just like, and I can't for the life of me explain why I like it or what it is I like about it. Comes straight down into the second verse, which sounds really similar to the first, but for some reason it feels slightly different. I mean, the atmospheres are there. You know, as I mentioned, you're in a come down, so it kind of feels a little bit more progressive. You get kind of those rock sounds into like a rock-like area. Rocktronic, some people call it. I'm so neutral towards this area because, you know, it adds uniqueness, but I do think what we'll talk about is it changes the experience a little bit. Similar vocal melody as before. We got that piano there. I will say, I don't know what processing is on these vocals, but or maybe like the harmonies with them, but I really like how it sounds. Just the actual sound, like melodies aside, the actual sound is really clean, and I subjectively really like it. Build up right here with kind of a filtered melody that you already feel like is going to be there in the second drop. And a more unique second drop. I definitely think it adds to the creativity of the track and the uniqueness. You know, I always say that, you know, we want things to feel different from area to area. I'm neutral, if not slightly positive towards this area. A little bit more neutral, actually. And I really like this area. Again, the vocals with the drums, with the melody, everything playing and layered on top of each other. Nice drums. And an actual outro. Very, very refreshing. And that is Colder by Blanke and Megan Ashworth. All right, so what do I think about this track? Again, it's really hard to put into words everything that, you know, I interpret and everything I listen and how I feel about it, but I was hopefully able to give you guys an idea of exactly what it was that I liked and disliked, or I was neutral towards. There's a few things I want to mention. Starting off with the vocals. Again, the vocals as a whole, there's some melodies that I think are a little bit basic, and there's some melodies that I actually like a little bit more. The interesting thing about the melody, the section about the melody I like a little bit more is that as I mentioned, something about it is just processed so nicely. I don't know if it's harmonized well. I don't know if there's specific delays or echoes or reverbs on it, but I really, really like how it sounds. Not only do I like how it sounds, I think the melody is, you know, it's a quite nice melody, especially compared to the first two. And especially when you layer it on top of the drums at the end, it makes the re-listenability, the repeatability we'll call it, it makes it a little bit nicer to listen to, because when you listen to it again, you kind of appreciate that melody a little bit more. That's one of the things. So again, there are things that kind of feel unique about this track and feel distinct, especially with those melodies, even though on the surface and slightly beyond the surface, it seems like a normal future-based melodic bass track. And as far as the progression goes, again, it's there. It's unique from area to area. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But, you know, you have the intro vocals, you get the drop, you bring it down, and it feels a little bit more atmospheric in that area and a little bit more subdued with the vocals that are pretty similar to the first verse. And then you introduce the rock drums, and you get a unique second drum, and then with an outro that I absolutely love. I'll probably talk a little bit more about that in the end, but again, outros are just so refreshing. All right, and finally, let's talk about the big one, which is going to be the experience, because this is where it gets really, really hard. It's super hard to put into words exactly kind of where my criteria is, because I've critiqued a lot of tracks in the past, and I critique tracks about this all the time, is about their lack of progression and lack of uniqueness when things sound really, really similar from the first half to the second half. This is one of those tracks that is actually pretty unique in all areas, especially when you consider things like the rock drums and rock-like area in the second verse, and the second drop being completely distinct, not completely distinct, but distinct to the first in melody and melody and sound design, really. And the hard part about that is, you have to ask yourself, if I say that making the track more unique in different areas and different in different areas is better, then why can't you just have a track that has no structure and just kind of changes drastically all over the place? And I still haven't quite fully developed, the concept and the ideas of how these things work, as far as when you have a track that's really, really unique in different areas, the story and the experience kind of falls apart. I use the analogy of movies all the time. Imagine if a movie was just kind of like completely covered different plots with different characters, different production, different directors, and different everything, just randomly split. Like you're watching one movie at one point and then completely unrelated, you're watching a completely different movie halfway through. The reason I use this analogy is because it's the same with tracks, right? It's not necessarily true that change is inherently good for the track, and that if you go in completely different ways and do completely new things, that it's going to be better. Because obviously you want to have a story and something cohesive and kind of things tied together in a movie or in a track as well. So I think change and uniqueness kind of exists in tracks, kind of exists on a spectrum where you want to have uniqueness, but every time you change something and do something different, you sacrifice a little bit of that story. Maybe not sacrifice, but you affect a little bit of that story to kind of change directions when you try to do different areas and different parts and different tracks. It's actually one of the reasons why I kind of pull back on tracks I've made. Like, for example, like Call is the example I think about all the time in my track, where you really could have just stuck with the same drop in the first verse and used it again for the second. The intention plays a role in the uniqueness and the fact that I just like the dance floor drum and bass sound. The intention plays the role, which I think carries the weight into the second half of the second drop of that track. But you do, and I admit this, you do lose some of the experience of the track when you do something drastically different in the second drop than when you do it with the first. So the point I'm just making is that change exists on a spectrum. When you change a lot of things about the track, you kind of sometimes sacrifice, or at the very least affect, kind of the story, the narrative, the cohesiveness, and really what you could develop in the experience of the track. No, the reason I bring this up is because this is the hard part about this track. This track has a lot of uniqueness that I critique a lot of other tracks for not having. But in this case, I don't quite know where it falls on that spectrum of, okay, is the uniqueness good? Does it affect the experience? Because I do think it affects the experience. I actually, that rock area in the middle, when you listen to the track just kind of at the surface level, it's nice because it's a switch up, it's different, it's creative. But when you really try to analyze and understand the track beginning to end, it does change the experience enough that it kind of pulls you back slightly. And even the second drop being a distinct drop, especially with the rock area, I think it changes the experience even more. I think, and I'm just theorizing at this point, maybe if you had one or the other, the track could be a little bit more cohesive. I actually don't know. You'd have to experiment. That's just an idea that I threw out there. But I do think that there's enough change in it that the track as a whole kind of loses in its experience by not having something solid or firm to kind of hold itself onto. The word I've used in the past is direction, not in a movement and progression sense, but in a direction as in a purpose sense. We'll probably just use that term from now on, maybe purpose or experience or things like that. So that's why I said this track is really, really hard to rate, because again, there's a lot of uniqueness. It's hard because it doesn't fall into fixed criteria. I could praise it for its uniqueness and for its progression and for its distinct areas, like I've critiqued other tracks in the past, but I don't want to ignore the fact that I do think it's lacking a little bit of experience and purpose as a whole. So that's why I said this track is really hard to rate. That's why I just wanted to point out the things that I liked and disliked, because that's at least going to give you some idea of where my rating comes from when I really can't quite put into words or even necessarily understand what this track does, how it does what it does, why it does what it does, and how it affects the story, the experience, and everything. And that's it about that. So why don't we actually get to rating this track? Because what would I give it from 1 to 10? And if you saw last video, we're here and I realized that I just completely forgot to rate it again. So I'll need to take some time right now to think about it. Although if you saw last video, you know exactly where this is going to end up anyways, which I think is probably just going to put us at a 5.5, which is where we ended up with Dimension's Guardian Angel and All the Time by John Summit, I believe. And it's really interesting that we come into these areas where when tracks do unique things and different things, but you can't really kind of explain or understand or even to some extent appreciate how the story works together, you kind of end up in that 5.5 area. You want to give it above a 5, but you know, when it's not as cohesive, when it doesn't feel like it has as much of a purpose, it's hard to give it more than that. Real quick recap, Dimensions Guardian Angel, I said I really like the vocals, I really like the uniqueness, but it was just a little bit basic and simple. All the time I said it was creative and it did a lot of cool things, and I was like, you know, shaking my head. I was bobbing my head. But again, it really didn't feel like it had much purpose or had much going for it. The interesting one you look at now is Hurricane by 7 Lines, which I believe I gave a 6, which definitely had a little bit more purpose and structure. And I also found really hard to rate and understand. And I believe I gave that one a 6. And I'm actually a little bit more firm on that rating, because the more I listen to Hurricane, the more I actually quite like the track. I actually do like Hurricane. I think it's a little bit interesting, a little bit unique. It has good elements that I like. And I think 6 is an appropriate rating for that track. So with this track, with Colder by Blanke, I do think we just leave it at a 5.5. It's possible it climbs up to a 6. And the reason I'm torn is because, again, immersed and really scrutinizing it, I don't think this track holds up to scrutiny. That's actually the term I should have used at the start. I don't think this track holds up to scrutiny, but on the surface and kind of taken at face value and just kind of listening to enjoy it, I actually do like it. I like the drop. I like the melody. I find myself repeating it to my heads. I really like how it's processed, and not to mention the outro, which it's so refreshing at this point. I think I'm going to go on the record and just say that if you're a producer out there watching this, it's absolutely free, people. Include an outro in your tracks. Not only A, because in my opinion, you just should, right? You can be a little bit more artistic. But B, I think so many tracks now aren't including outros that at this point, if you just include an outro, just to include it, you don't have to be intentional about it. No intention. You can just include an outro and it's automatically more artistic than most tracks out there, because forget all that retention and short tracks and attention span stuff. If you actually want to make art, it's so free. Most tracks aren't including outros. So if you do, you're already a step above, an artistry above those tracks. So again, I say this and I rant because I don't want to undermine the outro, and I really want, outros are just so nice. They actually deliver track experiences. They allow you to play around with the track. If you saw actually last video, the Midas remix challenge, I talked about outros at the end and how doing certain things with outro can lead to certain effects. But again, just actually including one can just make your track instantly a step above the others, because other tracks aren't including them right now. So again, an outro on this track just takes it a step up. But the point is, again, I like this track. I actually do. I like the melodies. I like the sound. I like the drops. But I don't know where it falls on that spectrum of scrutiny versus meant to be enjoyed on the surface level. I think 5.5 is a fair rating. With time, this could come up to a 6. It's very possible. I actually don't know. So 5.5, 6. I don't think this comes up to a 7. It would need to hold up to scrutiny to go up to a 7. And again, on the and a little bit past the surface, you want to put it to a 5 because it does sound a little bit basic. You know, you get the vocals, you got a basic future bass drop. You switch it up, and the experience is kind of, you know, a little bit all over the place with the rock, and then the unique second drop where it just feels like you're doing different things. Again, part of me wants to give it a 5. Not only especially when you scrutinize it, but even if you just take like a further step back, like if this track came up on shuffle in a future bass playlist, I don't know how much it would stick out. But again, it's tough because I do like it. I do like the melodies. There are things I like about it. The more I think about it, now that I'm saying it out loud, I do think 5.5 is a fair rating. Maybe you get to a 6, but it's most likely going to stay firm in that 5.5. So again, time will tell. We'll see how things fare. We'll see if this is part of a larger project, because, I mean, part 1, Exodus, that was the other thing I forgot to mention, which is why I wanted to mention that we're rating this as a single, which if you saw the previous videos I mentioned earlier, you know what that means. But part 1, Exodus, maybe this will be part of a larger project and maybe it will get bumped up. Today, when we're rating it as a single, when we're taking a look at Colder by Blanke and Megan Ashworth, we are giving it a 5.5 out of 10. All right, and that is about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Again, interesting video today because sometimes there are tracks that are hard to put into words exactly where they might fall under my criteria. Do I need, and by the way, I do think my criteria is going to change over time. Right now, I'm basing my criteria off of things I can describe. Progression, narratives, melodies, storytelling, uniqueness, things like that. But you know, I do think there's room for improving criteria and maybe understanding tracks a little bit more and being able to describe how we understand tracks. Right now, I can only rate things based off of how I listen and how I experience them and how I process them in my brain, which is really, really hard to describe. But again, you know, at the end of the day, I do try to be as objective as possible. I'm looking at these tracks and thinking, hey, you know, do I like it? Do I not like it? Is it unique? Is it not unique? Does it deliver a nice experience and story? Does it not deliver it? What does it feel like it's trying to accomplish? Things like that. So when we look at those criteria, those are all things that apply into my rating. So again, an interesting video because it's hard to say where this track, it's hard to really describe and break this track down into words, but I can explain how it fits in certain areas, which leaves us with this. So again, if you guys have any questions in the comments, let me know. If what I said makes sense, especially when we talk about, I think one of the big things we're talking about right now is, you know, when you scrutinize tracks versus when you take them at the face value. So if you guys have any thoughts about that, about this track, definitely let me know in the comments. Let me know your criteria about different tracks, how you guys analyze or process certain tracks, if what I said makes sense or if it doesn't make sense, and anything like that. Let me know what rating you would give this track, and if you have any other thoughts, make sure to leave them down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. But other than that, that is all I have for you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.